What's going on, guys? It's Fantasy Stock Exchange here, and today we're going to be bringing forth our way too early 2022 wide receiver rankings. Again, you guys are going to be watching this after we have already posted our running back rankings, and today we're just going to deep dive at our projected top 12s going into next year's fantasy drafts. Again, a lot's going to change over the offseason, a lot of personnel moves, schematic moves, team moves overall, but if we were to draft our fantasy drafts right now, this is kind of the outlook we would have in terms of where we would value these receivers. And we did sort them by tiers for this one. But either way, Corey, how you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I just want to specify this is redraft. This isn't like
Yeah.
dynasty
Yeah.
rankings
Sorry.
or anything like that too. So this is just a way too early look. If you guys are doing Underdog has best ball drafts going for 2022. If you guys are doing some of those, then maybe you want to use these rankings for that. But yeah, I'm doing good. I'm excited for this. If you guys enjoy this video, as always, hit the like button, comment any of your thoughts down below, and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Without further ado, though, let's hit the intro.
All right. So to start off the position, the guy that was number one this year, number one in receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. It would be pretty disrespectful if we didn't rank Cooper Kupp as our number one overall receiver. Again, I talked about it in the mock draft, but this guy legitimately just had the best fantasy wide receiver season we have ever seen in terms of a point per game outlook in points per, in terms of PPR. And there's really nothing that we can expect to change. The only real concern you can have here is that he is an older wide receiver. He's going to be 29 by next year, but the schematics are going to be the same. We know Sean McVay, we know Matthew Stafford, we know Cooper Kupp are all going to be intertwined with each other for 2022. We know Cooper Kupp's going to occupy his role as that slot dominant target hog. And in general, this is going to be one of the best offenses in the league. So realistically, based off what we've seen this year, based off what we could project reasonably going into next year, there's no plausible case, in my opinion, to not have Cooper Kupp at least in your top 2 or 3 wide receivers.
Yeah, the only thing I could see really changing about Cooper Kupp's situation is maybe with Cam Akers back next year, they commit a little bit more to the run in the red zone specifically, because coming into this season, that was a big draw of why we liked Cam Akers before he, tore his Achilles. So maybe that's kind of affects Cooper Kupp's touchdown output a little bit. But either way, I still think when they throw in the red zone, it's going to be Cooper Kupp, as we saw this year. And he's even as we saw in Jared Goff's tenure with Cooper Kupp, he was the guy that was consistently a red zone threat, had 10 touchdown season in 2019. And then in 2018, before he tore his ACL, was on pace for a double-digit touchdown season as well. But yeah, Cooper Kupp, I know like a lot of the times we don't see the wide receiver one repeat itself year over year, but there's realistically no case I can make for Cooper Kupp not to be at one. This is a guy that averaged 25.8 fantasy points per game in PPR, which is, among the high end of those league-winning wide receivers that I talked about in last week's video. The 2018 DeAndre Hopkins seasons, all the Antonio Brown seasons, like Kupp was even better than all of those guys.
Yeah, definitely. He was an absolute stud. I don't really, again, apart from maybe red zone usage, see much being taken away here. Again, maybe he falls from, 15, 16 touchdowns. So maybe he's around the 10 to 12 range. Either way, Cooper Kupp is going to be that stud yet again. Another guy that's been a staple of the fantasy football space these past few years and has been Aaron Rodgers' number one target over these past years. We're going to go to Davante Adams from the Green Bay Packers as our second overall consensus wide receiver. And this is very largely dependent. Obviously, we know recent rumors, recent track record going into this past year that Aaron Rodgers has made it clear he does not want to be a Green Bay Packer. If he is not a Green Bay Packer going into 2022, obviously we will adjust the rankings accordingly. Davante Adams won't be at 2, but all things aside, this is assuming that Aaron Rodgers is back in Green Bay. Davante Adams is his number one wide receiver. And if that's the case, we have seen this connection over these past few years be so good to the point that we can't rank him anything below this top 2. Again, Cooper Kupp, you give him the nod because of the year he had this year, but Davante Adams has been the staple of the wide receiver position really since 2017. And if Aaron Rodgers is back, there's no real reason to expect that to change.
Right. Like you said it, he's been like bona fide number one wide receiver the past 3 years, especially in 2018, 11.3 targets per game. Last year, 10.6 targets per game. And this year, 10.8 targets per game. This is a guy that is pacing 160, 180 targets per season easily every year, and a guy that is heavily involved in the red zone. And even this year, we didn't see him have a stretch of games where he was scoring a lot of touchdowns. So his touchdown total was even a little bit lower than what we normally see Davante Adams at. We also had a couple like COVID complications and stuff like that that kind of impacted his season a little bit, but he was still every bit as good as Davante Adams has been. He was a little bit more in line with the 2018 version of Davante Adams rather than the 2020 version of Davante Adams that we saw last year, where he was just by far and away the best receiver in fantasy. But even still, if Green Bay wins in the playoffs this year, like I seriously think winning cures all. If Green Bay wins the Super Bowl this year, I think both Adams and Rodgers are back. But if they lose in the NFC Championship for the like fourth straight year or whatever, how many times they've been to the NFC Championship, then we could see Davante Adams move on to a new team. We could see Aaron Rodgers go to a new team, and they might not even be together in their new team. So that's all a risk with Davante Adams. If again you guys are doing best ball drafts right now and you're looking to take Davante Adams at the top of your drafts, he probably would fall to like 7, 8, 9 area if he was like a Raider, for example, instead of the Green Bay Packers where he currently stands. So either way, Davante Adams, assuming he's with Aaron Rodgers, a guy that is an elite fantasy wide receiver and is probably a top 5, top 6 pick for me next year.
For sure. And again, these early installments of the rankings are just based off what we can reasonably project going into 2022. However, again, if you are in your best ball drafts right now, way too early best balls, and you feel more confident in, taking like a Chase, Jefferson, Hill, because you basically know what's going to happen for them in terms of certainty going into next year, by all means. But again, if Adams is back in Green Bay, if Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback there, he is a locked and loaded mid to early first round pick and should be at worst the second receiver off the board. But either way, we kind of drop a tier here in terms of where we kind of have these guys ranked. So obviously Kupp and Adams in terms of your projectability are those early to mid first round picks, locked and loaded stud wide receiver ones that really can make a difference at the position. Now we get into this, you're confident with these guys being your wide receiver one. You're happy with them, setting them in your lineup every single week in that wide receiver one slot. And we're going to start it off with Jamar Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals, who has had the best rookie season since 2014 when Odell Beckham went completely ballistic. Again, this was a guy that finishes a top 4 wide receiver as a rookie this year, which is super hard to do. Again, only really Justin Jefferson, as we're going to talk about next, has done that in these past 5 years. But yeah, with Jamar Chase, it's pretty simple here. You're getting a guy who was able to produce a stat line, 81 catches, 1,455 yards, and 13 touchdowns as a rookie. And again, the main argument for a lot of people is going to be that he was so damn efficient. How does he keep this up? Well, for starters, even though he was a top 5 receiver, he only guarded 128 targets. Again, this was a team that in the early to middle portion of the season was a very, very run dominant team. But when they started throwing the ball deep yet again, and once we saw that Burrow and Chase connection down the field, we saw them thrive. I mean, this is a guy who averaged 18 yards per catch this year, was an automatic deep threat. I mean, this is a guy that was scoring 50-plus yard touchdowns left, right, and center. And although the overall explosive ability down the field, these long touchdowns are probably not going to find themselves going into next year. Again, they're still going to happen, but maybe not as frequent as they did this year. I do think that's going to be offset by an increase in targets naturally for a second-year, 22-year-old wide receiver playing with his college quarterback in Joe Burrow. Again, this is the most exciting young quarterback to wide receiver connection in the league, and there's really no plausible case to be made that they're not going to continue to build off of this rookie season.
Exactly. And I think the framework is his former teammate with Justin Jefferson, who had 125 targets his rookie season, averaged 15.9 yards per reception. He was very efficient on his targets as well. And then coming into his second season, obviously we had what Justin Jefferson did this year, where he went from 125 targets to 167 targets, still, was very efficient in his own right, but took a little bit of a downtick in terms of the overall efficiency. So again, if Jamar Chase doesn't have, 950 plus yard catches like he did this year, next year, he could have 5 and instead get 170 targets instead of 128. So that's the kind of trade-off that we're probably looking for Jamar Chase. Again, it's very easy to project his situation forward. He has a young quarterback who's second year off of an ACL tear, could even be better than he was this year, probably an MVP candidate next year as well, even though he's going to get MVP votes this year too. So yeah, Jamar Chase, a guy that can easily be projected as a first-round pick in fantasy next year. Again, if you are caught between in your drafts right now, a questionable running back, like you don't want to take Dalvin Cook, for example. You want to go with a wide receiver. Just pick a guy like Jamar Chase. We know exactly what we're getting going into his second season.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you there. And going past Jamar Chase, both of our consensus 3, again, these top 3 names that we have are in the exact order that both of us have them. Now we get into the tiebreaker type of range where we have a couple guys from 4 to 7 that are in the same type of tier, that are in the same type of area that we actually both have flip-flopped. And we'll talk about Justin Jefferson fourth. or first. I currently have him as my wide receiver 5. You currently have him as your wide receiver 4. Talk about Justin Jefferson. What makes him so great, and what can we project reasonably going into 2022?
Yeah, Justin Jefferson, like I just kind of said, he saw that second year uptick in terms of his volume. The reason I have Justin Jefferson ahead of Tyreek Hill, who I have as my wide receiver 5, you have as wide receiver 4. The safer, situation is easily Tyreek Hill, right? We have Patrick Mahomes. He's the best quarterback in the league, probably still. And we also have Tyreek Hill tethered to an offense that we know the history of. We know how they use him. And the big plays that we saw from Tyreek Hill last year didn't really come this year. So there's that like positive regression factor for Tyreek Hill. But the reason I have Jefferson higher is because I think Jefferson has the Davante Adams, Cooper Kupp level ceiling from a target perspective, whereas Tyreek Hill, we've seen in his career, has not really exceeded 130, 140, 150 targets maximum. What we can see with Justin Jefferson going into next year, he had 167 targets this year. We could see a 185 target type of season out of Justin Jefferson if, because they cleaned house in Minnesota, maybe like, and this is all assuming they have Kirk Cousins still, but they could shift towards more of a pass heavy approach, shift a little bit away from the run heavy approach that they've been. And with Adam Thielen, obviously aging, he's like in his 30s. We have KJ Osborne, who's kind of come onto the scene. Justin Jefferson could carve out a 30+% target share easily next year. And if the offense is throwing the ball 600 times instead of, 520 or whatever they've been the past couple years, then I think Justin Jefferson could reach that Davante Adams, Cooper Kupp level ceiling in that 11 targets per game type of mold.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see the case for Jefferson from a strict volume standpoint. You fully have it there. And again, the efficiency could find its way closer to his rookie season rather than this year. And even if it holds this year, we saw this guy be a top 5 wide receiver, well worth this pick. The main kind of concern I have of Jefferson over a guy like Tyreek Hill, again, we know the certainty of Tyreek Hill attached to the right arm of Patrick Mahomes, just saw his highest target output season of his career with 150 target pace across 16 games. The main reason why I would prefer, again, Tyreek Hill to Justin Jefferson is the uncertainty around Kirk Cousins with new management coming in Minnesota. Again, I know we made the case that Davante Adams will have Aaron Rodgers, but I do think it's a completely different situation in Minnesota. Again, they fired house. Rick Spielman, Mike Zimmer, and Kirk Cousins. He only has $10 million in terms of dead cap. So if the Vikings were to move on from Kirk Cousins, who, although he gets consistently bashed on Twitter, is indeed a very good, very accurate top 12-ish type of quarterback, they would free $35 million. So I don't plausibly see a way that Kirk Cousins is going to be back in Minnesota again. If he is back, I'm perfectly fine of making this change. But with Tyreek Hill, the next guy we're going to talk about, we may as well go into this argument right now. Again, 150 target pace across 16 games. And this is his lowest touchdown output season we've seen in the last few. Again, last year, 15 touchdowns in 15 games. 2019, 7 touchdowns in 12 games. 2018, 12 touchdowns in 16 games. This year, he only had 9 in 17 games. I do expect that the KC offense is going to be able to figure itself out. Again, this talent-wise, bar for bar, is probably the best offense in the league. And if that's the case, again, this is a proven double-digit touchdown scorer. If you bank on simple positive regression in that regard, which we could very well see with Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill, he could very well reintroduce himself back to that top 3 type of holding that we've basically seen across his entire career.
Yeah, the one thing I will say just quickly back to Jefferson is, yes, they could move on from Kirk Cousins, but what other options do they have, right? Because I don't think the Vikings are going to come in and clean house and be like, all right, yeah, it's easy to move off of Kirk Cousins because we have these 5 first-round quarterbacks in this draft this year, because we don't have that, right? We also don't have, maybe they want to make a run at like Russell Wilson or Deshaun Watson or something like that, but either way, I kind of just see them holding pat unless they can get one of those 2 guys that I just said, or maybe Aaron Rodgers, which I highly doubt he would actually go play in Minnesota. So that's kind of my only reasoning again, like for Justin Jefferson, and why I think Kirk Cousins is going to stay is because I don't think they have better options at quarterback to pivot to than what Kirk Cousins presents. But with Tyreek Hill, like you kind of already said, he's already reached his career apex in terms of targets. I actually tend to think his targets might go down next year as opposed to up, because the reason his targets were up this year is because defenses were taking away the deep stuff. They were taking away the long bombs and forcing him to run a lot more like drag routes and slants and stuff like that. So if the efficiency goes up next year, I tend to believe that the targets either stay the same or go a little bit down. So either way, Tyreek Hill, again, probably the safest pick of these top 5 receivers, in my opinion. I actually think even more than Cooper Kupp and Davante Adams is probably a safer pick to make right now if you're doing early drafts than even those guys could be. So yeah, no disagreements with Tyreek Hill. I have him at wide receiver 5.
Yep, no, fully agree. So moving past our consensus top five, we talked about that tie at four. We actually do have another tie as our sixth overall wide receiver. We have Stefon Diggs listed first, but I actually have Deebo Samuel as my wide receiver six. I'll let you make the case for Stefon Diggs. It's a pretty easy case to make. You know, Josh Allen, stud wide receiver, target volume, but I'll let you take care of it.
Yeah, the efficiency for Diggs definitely took a downtick this year than it was last year because the targets were basically the same. He had 166 targets last year, 164 this year in an extra game. But he had 127 receptions last year, which was, a very high number, obviously. Only had 103 this year, which was a pretty big downtick considering the targets were basically the same. And the yardage, 1,535 receiving yards last year, only 8 touchdowns, but he had 10 touchdowns this year, 1,225 receiving yards. So efficiency wise, he just wasn't quite there. They at the beginning of the season, they were spreading the ball out a little bit more as well. They were using guys like Emmanuel Sanders. They used, more Cole Beasley, and Dawson Knox obviously reemerged as a tight end threat that they could use. So Stefon Diggs, again, fits kind of the Tyreek Hill category. It's a very safe pick. He's a target hog wide receiver one for a great quarterback, a guy that some might even say had a down season, could be even better next year.
Yeah, no, I definitely fully agree with that. Again, Stefon Diggs, as safe as it comes, target volume, and again, you mentioned there's multiple times this year that him and Allen really just weren't on the same page, and we've kind of seen that take a good effect in these past few weeks, where we have seen Allen and Diggs, that combo, redevelop itself. Because again, at the end of last season, the end of the 2020 fantasy season, I mean, this was legitimately the most game-breaking stack in fantasy football. So, I do expect them to be able to figure it out for the longevity of the season. Again, this was kind of a long road, if you will, for the Buffalo Bills as a whole this year. I do think they're going to, increase the consistency next year. And if that's the case, I mean, Stefon Diggs is the bona fide one on what's going to be one of the top 5 to 7 offenses in the league. So I fully get the ranking of Stefon Diggs here, and I do agree that he is in this second tier, obviously behind Cooper Kupp and Davante Adams for us. The guy that I actually have at 6 and a little bit ahead of Stefon Diggs is going to be Deebo Samuel, and I don't think people are fully aware of just how good Deebo Samuel has been this year. So in the 16 full games he played, again, he did miss a game due to injury. In the 16 games he played in the 17-game season, this was a guy that had nearly 1,800 yards from scrimmage and had 14 combined touchdowns. But get this, he had 14 combined touchdowns. 8 of them were rushing touchdowns. And again, a lot of people are going to point to the fact, oh, Elijah Mitchell was out. That's why he was using the rushing game. Yeah, I don't expect him to score 8 rushing touchdowns next year. But what this tells me more than the actual, regression is he's not going to score that again. What this tells me more so is the fact that Kyle Shanahan went out of his way to make sure that the best playmaker on his offense was getting the ball in crucial situations. In the red zone situations, were you going to trust Jeff Wilson or Deebo Samuel to punch it in? He was leaning towards Deebo Samuel. And again, Deebo Samuel, from a real life perspective, I know we want to talk about separation. We want to talk about success against man coverage. And that was what we were really, really stressing going into the year and why we were lower on Deebo Samuel. But we forgot to contextualize the fact that NFL coaches aren't dumb. If they know that their best player on offense is also the best tackle breaking machine in the NFL, they don't care if he can separate on man coverage. They're going to get him the ball on drags. They're going to get him the ball in the backfield. And that is what we've seen from Deebo Samuel. And one of the main things we're going to discuss on the lesson learned video. If you are in a scheme and you are very, very good after the catch, very, very good, very, very reflective in terms of like what you could do for the offense. We saw it with Cooper Kupp with the Rams. We did see it with Deebo Samuel as well, their counterpart with the San Francisco 49ers. And honestly, I have him at 6, and you can make the argument that he's in that top 4, type 5 type of range. I just more lean towards the more nuanced, refined wide receivers. But from a straight dog perspective, from a straight get the ball in his hands and let him work, Deebo Samuel is fully worth this ranking being in our top 7.
Yeah, and I think when you compare these two guys that we just talked about, Diggs versus Samuel, Stefon Diggs, for reference, had 0 plays of 40-plus yards this year. 0. He had 3 in 2020. He had 3 touchdowns also in 2020. So that could be why we think Stefon Diggs had a down season. Deebo Samuel had 7 plays of 40-plus yards, right? Yeah. Like, this is a guy that was hyper efficient. He had 6 touchdowns of 40-plus yards as well, 2 rushing and 4 receiving. So, yeah, this is a guy that, like, the regression analyses are going to be after this year, because Deebo Samuel could definitely be a guy that, regresses from these big play perspective. But At the same time, the way he's used, he is one of one. There's no other players that you can compare to Deebo Samuel from a usage standpoint because nobody else has Kyle Shanahan. Nobody else is as good as Deebo Samuel with the ball in his hands as well. The only concern you probably have going into next year is injuries, which at running back is obviously a little bit more stomachable because everybody has injury concerns at running back. At wide receiver, there's guys like Diggs and Hill and Jefferson. These guys haven't been injured in their career to the extent that Deebo Samuel has, and also going back to Deebo Samuel in college. So he could definitely be a guy that I see people taking in like the mid-second round of drafts, and him being, injury plagued all of next season, and everybody regrets that draft pick. But I could also see him doing what he did again.
Yeah, and again, he is one of the more risk reward type of assessments you have to make in your drafts this year. Because again, if he has another season like he did this year, mid-second round is going to be a steal. Because again, this was a guy that averaged nearly 19 half PPR points per game at the wide receiver position. You talked about that being league breaking from the running back position, and we know typically that the highest of the highest running backs are usually the top scorers in fantasy football. But the fact that Deebo Samuel was basically just going blow for blow with some of the best running backs in the league, it's remarkable. I mean, this is a guy that averaged nearly 2 points per game, half PPR more than Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon was a top 4 running back this year. It's just remarkable what Deebo Samuel did. And kudos to him because, man, if I'm going to be wrong on an assessment going into this year, at least let me have fun watching the damn guy. And Deebo Samuel was one of the most fun players to watch in the entire NFL.
Yeah, and he was easily the most wrong we've been about a player, probably in the last 2 years, because not only were we wrong on the fact that he would be like a solid contributor, we were so wrong on him thinking that he'd be a solid contributor. He ended up being a league-winning wide receiver. So we were dead wrong on Deebo Samuel, and I'm happy to be wrong on him because even though I didn't have a lot invested in him, I did have him in our listener dynasty league, and he helped me get to the finals. I didn't actually win, but AJ Brown, the next guy that we have on the list, I have him, I believe, a bit higher than you do. He actually has kind of similar concerns, I would say, to Deebo Samuel, is that we've seen him be banged up in his career. But when he's on the field, he is one of the best wide receivers on the planet. There's nobody really in the league outside of Deebo Samuel that could say is as dangerous with the ball in their hands as AJ Brown, a guy that is consistently breaking efficiency models, a guy that breaks long touchdowns left, right, and center, and bullies corners anytime he's up against them. The big concerns that we have for AJ Brown are, Derrick Henry's going to be back next year. They're obviously going to be a run-heavy offense. But the Julio Jones thing is also something to take into account. Maybe Julio Jones contributes a little bit more next year than he did this year because he was mainly a non-factor all season. And that could be a concern for AJ Brown. But regardless, I'm going to bet on the ability. I'm going to bet on the Titans offense probably being a little bit better, more consistent than they were this year, and hopefully a little bit healthier than they were this year as well.
Yeah, no, I definitely see the case. Again, I do have AJ a little bit lower than you, but he's still ranked in my top 10. I still think he's going to be a very, very good wide receiver this year. And he's a guy that we flat out missed in terms of our mock draft a couple days ago. We realized it right after recording that, damn, like we should have at least said something about AJ Brown. But regardless, like this is a stud player in real life. I do think Ryan Tannehill, although he may not return to his 2019, 2020 form, he's going to be better this upcoming year than he was this past year. I mean, flat out simple. When you're throwing to Nick Westbrook-Akine and Anthony Ferkser, and you don't have Derrick Henry to take pressure off in terms of the play action game, yeah, his numbers were completely down this year. However, with everything everything projected to be healthy going into next year, I do think that the Titans offense can be able to fix itself. And heck, maybe we see a little preview of it going into this year's playoffs.
For sure. And even despite that, Tannehill had the 8th highest PFF passing grade this year. So it's not like he was just completely a dumpster fire without these guys on the field. He was still pretty solid, but it's hard to expect him to put up a whole ton of points without Derrick Henry, without Julio Jones, and without AJ Brown for a good majority of the season. So the next guy that we have here, kind of a polar opposite type of guy to AJ Brown, is more of the volume is king type of wide receiver in Diontae Johnson, who yet again breaks volume models, like just consistently commands targets. This is a guy, I'm pretty sure I saw a stat on Twitter. This guy's like 17 double-digit target games in the last like 25 games that he's played. This is a dude that just gets absolutely fed the ball. Again, the only concern that I really have for Diontae Johnson going into next year is that we've seen Ben Roethlisberger do this with his number one wide receiver. We've seen Ben Roethlisberger absolutely feed his number one wide receiver. I think we both expect Ben Roethlisberger's final game to be against Kansas City in the wild card round. So if Ben Roethlisberger is no longer the quarterback in Pittsburgh, is the new quarterback, whoever it might be, Garoppolo, rookie draft pick, whoever, Are they going to use Diontae Johnson to the extent that Ben Roethlisberger used them, or are they going to spread the ball out a little bit more? Maybe Pat Fryermuth and Chase Claypool command a little bit more volume with that quarterback. That's my only concern with Diontae.
Yeah, it's definitely fair to say there's a larger range of outcomes for Deontay Johnson compared to, let's say, Keenan Allen. However, I do think that if Deontay Johnson hits his ceiling, if we do see improved quarterback play and the volume doesn't completely fall off the earth again, it's a hard argument to make considering the fact that he had 169 targets this year in 16 games, over 10 per game with Ben Roethlisberger. However, even at 8.5, 9 targets per game from a much better improvement of a quarterback, we're going to see Diontae Johnson return value as a top 12 type of wide receiver. And quite frankly, again, 8 touchdowns, finishes the wide receiver 8 overall in PPR. If he ups that range to, 12, 13 with improved quarterback play with an improved offense, maybe he enters the top 5 type of area. Again, I think we're pretty safe in terms of our assessment where we have him right now, balancing out that whole range of outcomes. But he's definitely, in terms of actual on-field product, one of the more safer bets to earn targets across really this entire wide receiver rankings.
And similar to Jefferson, I do think he has that 180 target potential that could put
Yeah.
him into that Cooper Kupp range, like we saw this year. Like, it wouldn't shock me at all if Diontae Johnson had a 23 PPR points per game season next year, because that is in with the range of outcomes. Assuming they get a bit better of quarterback play, that'll make him more consistent on those targets. So moving off of Diontae Johnson, who we had as basically our wide receiver 9, tied for our wide receiver 8. Now let's close out the top 10 with Keenan Allen. Obviously, Keenan Allen, there's a couple concerns that you could have with Keenan Allen, mainly due to how old he is. He is definitely getting up there in age, but Keenan Allen, the situation is just so great for Keenan Allen. He's also been in the Diontae Johnson mold of a guy that just consistently gets double-digit target games, left, right, and center all season, and he is attached to a much better quarterback than Diontae Johnson. So I think you could even make the argument that Keenan Allen should be over Diontae Johnson for that reason, but I'm going to trust the youth factor and the chance that, Diontae Johnson continues to improve as a player, which is why I have him a little bit higher than Keenan Allen. But either way, Keenan is a guy that is going to command probably 160 plus targets, book it next year from Justin Herbert, which means he has a lot of touchdown equity involved in that. And we don't really know what Mike Williams' situation is quite yet. I kind of expect him to be back with the Chargers. He's already kind of come out and said that he wants to be back with the Chargers, and they have the cap space in order to bring him back. So I'm not going to necessarily bake in the fact that Keenan Allen might be alone in that receiving core, because I do think that there's a good chance that even if Mike Williams is back, they probably add somebody of significance as well.
Yeah, no, I definitely can see it. Like again, they're not just going to completely take a Mike Williams out of this offense. However, again, you mentioned the peripherals of the situation. Herbert's going to be at or near 5,000 passing yards. Keenan Allen's his number one weapon in terms of the passing game. This is going to be a team that will throw the ball a lot and will score a lot of points. Again, are we going to peg Keenan Allen for a ton of touchdowns? No, not necessarily, because he hasn't really been that guy in the past. However, again, will he have the opportunity to improve upon those efficiency in terms of scoring touchdowns? Absolutely. Again, if he went out and had an 11 touchdown year with Justin Herbert throwing 45 touchdowns, would we really be shocked? Not in the slightest, in my opinion. If that were to be the case, that is a plausible case for Keenan Allen vaulting into that next, first, second round type of tier player. However, at his current point, I do think he's more of a late 2 to mid 3, as opposed to, the Deebo Samuel, Stefon Diggs range of being early to mid 2s, in my opinion.
Right. And with those guys, you get a little bit more of the downfield production than
Yeah.
you get with Keenan Allen. And I mean, like, for what it's worth, the reason Keenan Allen and Diontae Johnson are still this high is between the two of them, they had 21 double digit target games this year, which is insane.
Yeah.
They both are just targeted at an extremely high rate. So in PPR leagues, you could definitely make the argument that they belong over a guy like AJ Brown, even maybe over a Deebo Samuel, just because he gets some of his value from the rushing game as well. So moving on to the next guy, obviously, a guy whose jersey is hanging right over my head in Mike Evans, who we have at wide receiver 11 right now. Again, Mike Evans, a lot of people he's probably going to go this high in ADP again. And every single year we do the same song and dance with Mike Evans. He doesn't belong to go this high.
Touchdown regression.
Yeah, he's going to regress from a touchdown perspective. Again, for my money, Tom Brady ain't going anywhere. So as long as Tom Brady is still in Tampa Bay, Mike Evans still has double-digit touchdown floor. I'm not even going to say upside. Like, that's probably his floor, is double-digit touchdowns. That's how they use him. He's not going to be a guy that commands 140, 150, 160 targets. So in full PPR, maybe you knock him down a little bit, but Mike Evans is a guy that has had 8 1,000-yard receiving seasons to start his career. He has been the model of consistency, not only in the modern NFL, in the history of the NFL, because nobody else has done that. And this is a guy that has double-digit touchdowns in back-to-back seasons with Tom Brady. So with Antonio Brown definitely not coming back, Chris Godwin a question mark to come back, Rob Gronkowski also an unrestricted free agent. I'm sure some of those guys will return. Same goes with Leonard Fournette as well. Mike Evans is still a guy that is going to be an engine of this offense and a guy that I expect to score 10, 12, 13, 14 touchdowns again next year.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Again, you're talking about range of outcomes. Like Mike Evans, again, we saw be a at minimum top 10 wide receiver this year. I believe he was actually what the half PPR wide receiver 7 in terms of points per game, if I'm not mistaken.
So
Four,
during the fantasy season, he finished as the wide receiver 11 in PPR points per game. So in half PPR, he would have finished a little bit
gonna be
higher,
higher.
obviously,
Yeah,
because he had more touchdowns. And obviously, that didn't include this week, which is not part of the fantasy season when he
correct.
scored 2 touchdowns. So that obviously puts his number up a little bit, probably around the wide receiver 6 to 7 range in half PPR.
However, again, like either way, in terms of projectability, like yeah, you can't take this full 16 game pace because he did miss that Carolina game. However, again, he played 16 games this year. He scored 14 touchdowns. He eclipsed 1,000 yards. That is going to be what you get from Mike Evans. You're going to get a
He's kind of
thousand.
like the Nick Chubb of wide receivers. Like he's probably not going to finish as a top 5 receiver unless Godwin gets injured next year or something like that. And he gets like 160 targets because he just doesn't have that type of volume in his range of outcomes unless an injury happens. But
Yeah.
he's going to finish inside the top 12 wide receivers probably again.
However, again, if Godwin leaves or if Godwin's hurt to start the next year, I mean, we saw when this guy had legitimate target ceiling 150, 160, 170 targets. Like 2016, he was the best wide receiver in fantasy. Like that's
Yeah.
in the range of outcomes. If anything were to happen to Godwin, even if something doesn't happen to Godwin, even if they have, I don't expect them to bring back AB, but hypothetically, even if they had another third producer like an AB, I mean, even Mike Evans on 115 targets, 120 targets is basically still a shoe-in to finish in the top 12 to 15 wide receivers. So I fully agree. This has to be his ranking because, quite frankly, there's really no doubt that he's going to be here if he plays the majority of the games next year.
Yeah. The only thing you have to worry about at that point is Tom Brady falls off, which I don't
Yeah,
think he's going to
which
because he's literally probably, if not the MVP favorite this year, the MVP, runner up.
people have been calling his fall off for the last 8 years.
Yeah,
Genuinely.
isn't it wild too that we have 2 quarterbacks that are in their like past the age of 35 as the MVP,
It's
co-front runners
hilarious.
right now, and I still think it should be Brady because he's 44 doing this. Like I think people kind of underestimate just how old he actually is.
Yeah.
But either way, let's get into the final receiver of our top 12, and then we'll talk about some honorable mentions.
Yeah.
We went from my team, now we're gonna go to your team with CeeDee Lamb, wide receiver from the Dallas Cowboys. I have him a bit lower than you do. You have him up at 9, I believe. I have him at 15. And the reason I have him lower is mainly just due to the fact that, not that I want to see it first, because I think that's a terrible argument for a third-year wide receiver who I guess will be a third-year wide receiver. But I do think the target competition is a real factor in Dallas. I know, Gallup and Dalton Schultz, Cedric Wilson, they're all free agents this year. So it'll really just be Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb on the books. But I expect, one, if not a couple of those guys to come back this year. We saw this offense go through a period of, down play, and CeeDee Lamb himself has only really commanded about a 21% target share over the first 2 seasons of his career, mainly in part due to the fact that he's a young receiver and he has a lot of target competition. So could he definitely go to a 25, 26, 27% target share next year, have that 1,500 yard, 10 touchdown season that we were kind of expecting from him coming into this year? Absolutely. But I do think some of the guys behind him that I have, like DK Metcalf, who's shown double-digit touchdown upside, a little bit more big play upside. T. Higgins, who obviously had a great second year this year, also going to be in an ascending, young offense next year. And Jalen Waddle, who we obviously disagreed upon before we started, recording this. But Jalen Waddle as a rookie had over 100 receptions. So I tend to give a little bit of credence to that and the fact that he might have a little bit more of an untapped ceiling than we're giving him credit for. But either way, CeeDee Lamb kind of fits into a range with all these guys. So you could really flip a coin and put him any which way.
Yeah, and I'll quickly touch upon CeeDee Lamb because, again, he's the reason why he's going to be in the rankings for us. He's currently ranked as my number 9 in terms of way too early rankings, and it's pretty simple to me because for CeeDee Lamb and for this Cowboys offense, again, it was basically a tale of 2 seasons. We saw a dominant offense that was scoring at will at the beginning part of the season, and then this last part of the season, we kind of saw things digress, and CeeDee Lamb is no different. Again, we saw this guy as a legitimate elite level wide receiver in those first 10 games. Again, 15.4 half PPR points per game, which would be right around the Jamar Chase area that Chase put up this year. So he was legitimately a stud. And although, again, the back half of the season was a little bit meh to say the least, he was still the wide receiver 15 in terms of half PPR points per game. So you're basically buying him like where I have him just a little bit above where he finished this year. And again, you mentioned third year type of breakout potential. I think CeeDee Lamb is one of the prime candidates to do that. Reason being is, although the touchdowns as a whole this year kind of look low, 6 touchdowns, 16 games, what the heck are we doing there? He hasn't scored a touchdown since week 11. And again, that has a lot to do with the fact that the Cowboys offense been inconsistent. He did have his concussion against the Kansas City Chiefs. Maybe that had lingering effects of him in terms of red zone usage. Who knows? But either way, again, when this guy was on his game, when this guy was hitting his ceiling, when him and Dak were at their prime in terms of connection, again, 6 touchdowns in the first 10 games of the year, top 5 type of wide receiver in terms of points per game. Again, that risk is a little bit baked in terms of the fact that if he had carried that over throughout the whole season, he would be just about maybe a little bit lower again than the Chase Jefferson range, but just about in line with the Diggs, the Samuels, the Keenan Allens. But because he had this down stretch of a second half of the year, you could probably get this guy in the mid-third round. And if that's the case, I'm going to be buying him all over the place, as you guys saw evident with our mock draft. I genuinely think that this is still the same type of talent that we talked about going into this year. He just had kind of the post-hype type of the year where, again, he was a little bit better than his rookie year, but not as good as we expected. But I do think that the third year is going to be where we see CeeDee Lamb go into that elite tier wide receiver, because I think personally as a talent, he's just on that cusp.
Yeah, and my only problem was I just wanted to see him command a little bit more targets this year because you're
Makes
right, he
sense.
was
Yeah.
pretty much in line with what he did as a rookie, and I expected, the Chris Godwin type breakout that we saw from him a couple years ago, the Calvin Ridley type breakout. Speaking of Chris Godwin, Calvin Ridley, let's talk about some honorable mentions because those two guys are definitely two big ones that aren't going to be on this list. Mainly due to just uncertainty. We really don't know what Calvin Ridley's, mental health situation is. We don't know what Chris Godwin's physical health situation is. If they're both back with Atlanta and Tampa Bay respectively, they definitely fit into this range that we're talking about and might fit into our top 12 come, June, July, August. We also have a couple guys that just finished outside this range. T. Higgins finishes top 12 wide receiver this year
Hard
in
one to leave
PPR
out.
points per game. Pardon?
I was just about to say a hard one to leave out for me.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Yeah. T. Higgins is a guy that obviously has the potential to finish as a top 12 wide receiver. He's already done it, even despite his teammate finishing as a top 5 wide receiver. And Joe Burrow, again, we got to expect that he's probably going to be as good, if not better, next year as a third year quarterback coming off of a second year off of his ACL tear. So T. Higgins, a guy that definitely still has a huge ceiling, even at consensus wide receiver 13 that we have him right now. DK Metcalf, who obviously had a pretty down season relative to expectations outside of scoring a lot of touchdowns. We really don't know what Russell Wilson's situation is going to be. We don't know if he's going to be staying, going, whatever. In whatever case, I think Metcalf probably fits himself into this range regardless. Even if Russell Wilson's staying and we know all that, I still think this is about the range that he's going to be ranked and where he gets drafted.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And another guy we can quickly talk about that we're personally a little bit more wary of, but is definitely going to be ranked amongst here in terms of the consensus, would be DeAndre Hopkins. The main reason why we're concerned is this screams Julio Jones all over to me again. Again, you got a near 30-year-old wide receiver who, quite frankly, the target competition was increasing with the Arizona Cardinals. I mean, this was not the 170, 180 target DeAndre Hopkins like we're used to. We did see sort of the Arizona Cardinals play their wide receiver by committee, if you will. I mean, Antoine Wesley, for crying out loud, has been basically occupying the DeAndre Hopkins role. So role is a little bit inconsistent for my taste. Obviously, the injury, lower body injury to a near 30-year-old wide receiver, I would rather just pass because, again, we saw what the Julio Jones ended up being this year. And again, it was a lot of the same thing going into the year. He's one of the best 5 wide receivers in the league. He has a new fresh start with the Tennessee Titans. Maybe he develops back into that guy we know. I would rather let someone else take that risk on DeAndre Hopkins, like somebody else took the risk on Julio Jones.
Yeah, the targets were really really concerning for Hopkins when he was on the field this year because we saw him 2 years ago with his first year with the Cardinals be a 10 plus target per game guy, and we only saw that a couple times in the games that he played. They were spreading the ball out a lot more than we expected coming into the season. Obviously, we touched on Jalen Waddle already. A couple guys that may be worth mentioning: DJ Moore, Terry McLaurin, depending on their quarterback situation. If either of their teams trade for a Russell Wilson, sign an Aaron Rodgers, trade for Deshaun Watson or something like that, they could fit themselves into this top 15 or so range of the rankings because we've seen both of those guys produce with no quarterback play basically. So That is the end of the video. If you guys did enjoy, hit the like button, comment any of your thoughts down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. If you guys want to become a member of the channel, you can hit the join button on the Fantasy Stock Exchange YouTube channel. If you guys are interested in getting our rankings, all the rookie content, dynasty content that we're going to be breaking down for you this offseason, we are moving all of that to our Patreon. So if you want to become a Patreon member, you can do that in the link in the description. All the benefits should be updated by now for the stuff that we're going to be offering you guys by the end of the offseason and pretty much through the entire draft cycle. We're going to be coming at you with tons of content on Patreon as well. So peace out, guys. Talk to you soon.